Welcome to the third part of Chapter 4 on our region of Europe. And so we're going to start this part talking about languages in the region. There are three main language groups in Europe. They are the Romance languages, the Germanic, and the Slavic. And related languages tell us a lot about cultural history, right? So when we think about Germanic languages, this includes not just German, but Danish, Dutch, English, Icelandic, Norwegian, Swedish. And so first, the Romance languages, they are based on Latin, which spread when the Roman Empire spread. This doesn't exist everywhere in the former Roman Empire. Some places were more easily Romanized than others. And then due to political changes, conquest displaced Roman languages in Eastern Europe, right? So in Eastern Europe, generally speaking, we do not have many Romance languages anymore, but we certainly have them in Western Europe and Southern Europe. Um, French, Spanish, Italian, all Romance languages. And so here's that picture from the beginning of chapter 4. So, for example, Rovinj, Croatia was renamed. It used to be called Rovigno, which sounds very Italian, right? Which that was its name during the expansion of the Roman Empire. Then we have Germanic languages. And so Germanic tribes spread throughout northern Europe after the fall of Rome. English is a Germanic language, but is really a mutt language. Really, we have a hodgepodge of um, Latin, Germanic, some Slavic. We have Arabic words. We really kind of mushed everything all together, but it is certainly most closely related to these other Germanic languages. For example, in English, you say the soup is hot, and in Dutch, you say de soup is hot. So very, very, very similar. And then you have the Slavic languages, which also exist in parts of Russia and the Near Abroad as well. So this is Eastern European tribes that spread after the fall of Rome. Um, we have the absence of Hungary there as they were very independent and isolationist. But all of these Slavic languages that exist. So I have a friend who's a native Polish speaker, and when she met me in Croatia, and she heard people speaking Croatian, and she said, I can kind of understand it. It's kind of like inside out Polish, right? There's some relation happening there. Um, there's a complicated linguistic geography in the region. Some fit the nation state model, for example, Polish. Right, Polish is the language of the Polish people and is the dominant ethnic group in Poland. Some languages are spoken by multiple countries. For example, German is spoken in several countries. Some countries are multilingual, for example, Belgium and Switzerland. In Switzerland, depending on where you live, you might speak French, Italian, or German. Um, then you have languages that represent underrepresented minorities, such as Basque, which is one of those regions of Spain that's trying to break away. So you can see over here on the right a sign where somebody has spray painted over the Spanish in order to promote the Basque that's on top. Um, Cultural importance is also giving to dying languages. So languages that generally aren't being spoken by as many people, and that's, for example, is Gaelic. So now there's a big push in Ireland to teach children Gaelic in school. And you still hear Gaelic spoken in the western part of the country, but signs being in both Gaelic and in English. Religion in the region is mostly Christian, and that has to do with Constantine after he became Christian and the Roman Empire spreading, he Christianized everybody. The majority is Catholic. We do have Protestant in the north, which is where the Protestant Reformation took place in Germany, and so Protestantism spread there. We have Eastern Orthodox on the Balkan Peninsula, which is down here. We have a Muslim majority in just a couple of countries, Albania and Bosnia, and that's a remnant of the Ottoman Empire. And then you have migrant minorities in urban areas, so where you have significant Muslim populations in several cities. There are very few Jews left in Europe. Many of them either died or fled during their persecution during the Second World War. but we do have some areas that still have sizable Jewish populations. Um, Europe is pretty secular, right? So although people identify as Christian, you have very low church attendance. We have 5% weekly church attendance in France, 15% in Italy, and that's compared to 33% in the US. It's considered to be of low importance. So um, 20% of people in Europe consider their religion to be of low importance. This is actually backwards. 20% of people in Europe consider religion to be very important to them, as opposed to 60% in the United States. We have very low birth rates because of that. So we don't have, even though we have a very large Catholic population, and the Catholic Church does not believe in birth control, um, uh, most people are not following that, but it still does influence culture. Uh, and so we're going to move on to talk about migration. Migration in the region keeps populations growing. It adds working people. We talked about in the previous section where we looked at those population graphs. There's two types of migration happening, some from other regions, such as Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia, and we'll talk more about that. People either who are coming for more better economic opportunities or who are seeking asylum. Lots of connections between former colonies. So, for example, large Indian populations in England. But we also have migration from within Europe, which was made easier by the European Union. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the European Union exactly is. But if you're a member of the European Union, if you live in an EU country, you can go work in another EU country, no problem. And so, for example, we have large Polish populations in London. A lot of people had left Poland for the economic opportunities available to them in London. And so we have some very, very diverse cities in Europe. And this is increasing animosity. So some of the nationalist movements that we're talking about is that people feel like their traditional European cultures of their countries are being assaulted by this increasing diversity that's happening. Uh, we're going to talk a little bit about the migrant crisis, and you're going to watch a video about this. And basically, we have migrants pred predominantly leaving Syria at this point, but certainly plenty of other places, including those in North Africa. And so they try to enter the EU into Italy and Greece and pass through the south and the east. And their desire is to get to the core and to the north. Um, for the most part. Many of them have families there, and there's more economic opportunities there. Remember, we talked about the South being more economically depressed than the North, and so the North being more economically equipped to take in these people. There's no cohesive policy in the EU about how to deal with this migrant problem, which has been a great source of conflict. Some people, you can see that picture in there, are very welcoming to migrants who are coming in. Some are not. There is a still frame of a Hungarian reporter who was caught tripping refugees as they were trying to make their way into Hungary, running from authorities. So if you can see, like, the amount of asylum seekers has just gone up, but most people are trying to get into this European core, right? We really want to get into Germany. So again, you're going to watch a video. In 2015, uh, as an example, over 1 million migrants crossed the Mediterranean to Europe, and often on boats like this that are overcrowded. About 3,800 people died in that 1 year. And so there's a couple of philosophies about what to do with this. And one was to just stop rescuing boats out there and to hoping it would discourage people, and it really did not. People are so desperate to leave refugee camps and to get to Europe that they will still get on these boats. And so this kind of made worldwide attention when there was a prominent picture in the news of a young Syrian boy who had washed up on shore. Unfortunately, he had died. And so you're going to learn more about this migrant crisis and just kind of how it's working and why it's happening in the first place. And so this data is as of March of last year, but we can see if you want to look and see where Syrians are, where they're fleeing um, Syria, and 4 million people have had to flee Syria because of the violence. The vast majority of those people are in other Middle Eastern countries. They are not. They haven't gotten into Europe, but the conditions here are very, very bad. So they're trying to cross over and get into Europe, and basically they're trying to get into these countries. Um, they're trying to cross through because technically you're supposed to seek asylum in the first country that you get to, but a lot of those countries they cannot handle these migrants. So you have people coming across from Libya and Egypt trying to make their way over to Greece and then through these countries that are not part of the Schengen Agreement, and so that way they could claim that this is the first EU country that they're trying to seek asylum in. Also, lots of people crossing into Italy as well. There's been a lot of anti-Muslim backlash, just like there has been in the United States, due partly to terrorism, but partly also to this migrant crisis. There is less cultural acceptance of Muslims in Europe, mainly because, for a couple of reasons, but Europeans are very secular, so they tend to frown more on people who are religiously devout, right? Because they have this very secular culture. Um, there's concerns about terrorism. There's concerns about homogeneity, so basically preserving their European culture. And so you have these legal actions taken as a way as a backlash against Muslims. You had the hijab ban in France in 2011. In Switzerland, you had a minaret ban, and minarets are those architectural structures that are on mosques in 2009. You could see a poster right here for that minaret ban, and you can see that Muslim woman looks very ominous in that picture, right? So this very kind of anti-Muslim sentiment happening. Just like in the United States, we have some very strong nationalist movements, right? So you have this political and cultural attachment to the nation. And so you can see there on the bottom, the British National Party, Britain is all full up. This is what Brexit was about, which we'll talk about, right? So we don't want outsiders coming into our country. Britain is for the British. This is rooted in language and religion, right? Because we identify with those who speak the same language as us, who have the same religion, who speak the same, um, who have the same culture. And so we have far right-wing nationalist movements that are pretty prominent throughout the region. Lots of very right wing uh, people getting into parliament and running for higher up offices. Just a couple weeks ago, not even, Angela Merkel was reelected in Germany, but this very right wing party got seats in parliament for the first time, and many people feel like this party is very, very close to some of the ideals of the Nazi Party. And this is a reaction to bad economies and immigration. It's a reaction that you've seen many times throughout history when there's problems in an economy, people tend to blame those who have most recently arrived as taking something from them. We're going to talk about the term balkanization and what that means. So, balkanization is the breaking up of a country into smaller states along ethnic lines. And this happened in the former Yugoslavia when it broke up. Um, and often through war. So we can see here's Dubrovnik, Croatia, which I visited, and this is a map that I took a picture of. If you climb up a hill, you can see it, and all of those dots and red blocks are places that were bombed after Yugoslavia broke up as disagreements about uh, countries arose. So Yugoslavia was united until 1991, and I'll show you a map of Yugoslavia after this. But basically, the communist regime there collapsed, and there was a bunch of round robin violence. So a lot of different smaller groups fighting each other for several years. Um, there are 7 countries there today, which I'll show you a map of. Possibly more in the future might break apart. That term balkanization, so this occurred in the Balkans, that's what the area is called, but this term balkanization is used for other locations now. You're going to hear me use this term later on in the semester. As an example of this, this kind of nationalist rhetoric is that when Slovenia was created out of the former Yugoslavia, there were plenty of people who were living there who had lived there for a long time who were not ethnically Slovenian. And when they created the government, they basically erased all of the public records of these people. And so these people refer themselves as the erased, and they have no documentation for any country. And so they have been fighting for years to get recognition, because you can imagine that if one day the United States just erased all of your records, no social security, no birth certificate, no anything. All of a sudden, you can't get a job, you can't get a driver's license. And this happened to a large group of people who weren't ethnically Slovenian. And the government at the time uh, maintained that it was a clerical error, which is unlikely. So if we look here, this is the last slide for this section. This is the former Yugoslavia. This is how it looked in 2008. But you have Slovenia, Macedonia, um, Serbia, Kosovo, Montenegro. You have the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is one country right now, but could certainly break apart into two in the future. So this is the last, that's the end of part 3 of chapter 4. You'll pick up that last piece of chapter 4 in the next module.